Welcome to Tushita. Welcome back to Tushita. Today we are celebrating the Days of Miracles. It's already the 10th day. We are moving quickly. So today we are so delighted to have Geshe Kelsang Wangmo with us. It's wonderful. Thank you so much, Geshe-la, for accepting. And I'm sure many people will still, coming a little bit later. Yeah, it's going up, but let's start on time. Um, so just to introduce Geshe-la very quickly, because we want to get right into the teachings and not waste any time. So Geshe-la comes originally from Germany and joins us today from Germany, and then has studied in the very prestigious Geshe program here in the institution in McLeod-Ganj called IBD, Institute for Buddhist Dialectics, for 17 years, and got as the first woman and the first Western woman still, the Geshe degree in 2011, I think it was Geshe-la, isn't it? Wow, it's already 14 years ago. Time flies. And since then, of course, has been teaching and translating for so many, projects and translated for teachers, is also the translator into German for His Holiness the Dalai Lama, and has so many different things, projects on her plate. So we are so delighted that Geshe-la made some time to join us to Shita, now just online, but very soon also for her annual course in June, also here at Tushita. Thank you so much, Geshe-la.
Thank you, Venerable Kumpela. Let's start just with a few moments of setting the motivation to be sure that from our sides, our mind is ready to receive teachings on the Dharma. Take a moment to think, may this not only benefit me personally, but also become a cause to be able to benefit all sentient beings. Okay, so this was just very short. A very short motivation because, well, I'm trying to do something today, and I don't know whether it's going to work out. I want to discuss, of course, dependent arising, as you know, but I want to bring in some scientific understandings or scientific studies on these aspects. So, what are the similarities? Because well, we live at a time when studying the Dharma, learning the Dharma is challenging. There are a lot of challenges, a lot of distractions, but there's modern science which very much supports many of the ideas presented in the Buddhist teachings, and particularly when it comes to dependent arising, about when it comes to what is reality. So there's a lot in modern science that supports that. Now, I'm not going to go into any details. Nothing what I'm going to say is difficult. It's just things we've heard many times, but or we may not have heard. It depends. But in general, I want to just draw this parallel to show what are the similarities to broaden our understanding, to make it fuller. So to start right away, well, dependent arising doesn't mean anything but the fact that everything exists in dependence on other things. It's a weird term in Tibetan. Well, this is a literal translation, dependent arising. It's basically just saying everything is dependent on other phenomena, but it also arises, it comes into existence. So stressing the fact that things are not there before, but then they come into existence, and that process also depends on other things. And then implied by that, implied is that things come into existence and depends on other things. They exist while they're there, they depend on other phenomena, and when they go out of existence, that is also dependent on other phenomena. All right. And so this interdependence, dependence on other things, is true for the material world and the mental world. Now, why is this important in Buddhism? For one simple reason. The reason is that all our problems, all our unwanted experience, pain, worry, fear, and so forth, comes from not fully understanding this principle of interdependence or this principle of dependent arising. Why? Because not understanding this idea is the result, is responsible for our mental afflictions. So our mental afflictions, which include mental harmful views, afflictive views, and afflictive emotions. Oftentimes, the mental afflictions or delusions are described as afflictive emotions, but not all of them are emotions. Some of them are just harmful views. So the view that none of my actions have it, or not all of my actions have consequences, or an extreme view that holds that the I exists somehow in an entity inherent in my body and mind. So these are just harmful views. But then there are also harmful emotions, emotional states such as attachment, aversion, and so forth, which harm us right in the moment when they arise, but also, of course, in the long term because they affect everything we do. Now, emotions are also described in modern psychology, and it's so fascinating that they're described in a very similar way as they're described in Buddhism. Now, I'm just going to summarize what I've found. Um, and again, it supports the Buddhist view, but also gives a slightly different perspective in terms of the terminology, just simply the terminology that's used. So they're described as psychological states that are that significantly influence our experience and behavior. Yeah, that makes total sense. They're complex reactions to internal and external stimuli and include cognitive, physiological, and behavioral components. That's how it's described. This is just a summary of what I found, especially when it comes to psychological or explanations you find in modern psychology. And then there are characteristics of these emotions. There are many of them, but maybe the most important ones are, for instance, they come with certain expressive behavior. So emotions can be shown in our expressive behavior, like in facial expressions, in gestures, voice, or body postures, which in that way we usually know if another person undergoes certain or experiences certain emotions. They're accompanied by physical changes, so the heart rate changes, the breathing changes, muscle tension, for instance, may arise. But what is most fascinating, and that's so similar to Buddhism, is the aspect of cognitive evaluations that we interpret general events and situations and we assign them a certain meaning, which then leads to emotional reactions. So the way we see the world has very much to do with the way we evaluate, the way we see the world is responsible for our emotions. So dependent arising therefore comes in the sense of if you understand dependent arising, well, certain emotions will be reduced, harmful ones will be reduced, while beneficial ones will increase. So let's see whether that's true or not. But just to share with you the explanation in modern psychology about emotions. And one more aspect is that is what's called behavior readiness. So this means they can motivate us, so emotions can motivate us or do motivate us to perform or refrain from certain actions. So that's what modern science tells us. And of course, when we think of karmic actions, they're very much motivated by our emotions. In Buddhism, you find more of an explanation of the different types of emotions, so attachment, aversion, arrogance, and so forth. So just to remind you, taking attachment. Now, this is important. I'm describing attachment now because an understanding of dependent arising can so effectively at least reduce attachment. I'm not even talking about dependent arising here in the sense of understanding emptiness, understanding the ultimate nature of phenomena, which is how it's usually explained and which is quite difficult. But just in terms of day-to-day life, how can we reduce our attachment, our aversion? Because that's the first step, to just reduce the strongest kind of harmful emotions. Okay, so what is attachment? It's an exaggerated or distorted mind. And it usually arises when the mind attributes excessive attractiveness or excessive positive qualities to an object. Just to say, to an object such as, I don't know, a person or a material object. So a particular positive quality or set of qualities are exaggerated or even projected. They may not even be there in the first place. They're projected onto the object or the person. And not just that, but these qualities are also no longer seen as just a part of the person, but as identical with them, to the extent that their negative qualities are no longer visible or are no longer perceived, or even if perceived, they're ignored because the positive has taken over to such a degree that, as I said, the person is seen as one with these positive qualities. And then it can give rise to a strong urge to acquire or to retain the desired object. There's always fear involved. It's tied usually to the expectation of continued possession or continued closeness, and it inevitably that kind of expectation leads to worry, fear, restlessness, worry, fear of losing this object, be it the person or a material object. And it's a huge obstacle to mental freedom. It narrows our mind, it binds our mind to external conditions, to external objects, other people. And there's a huge difference between attachment and love because attachment is self-serving and characterized by the characteristics I mentioned before, and it wants to possess and control. While, of course, love, in the Buddhist sense, is free from these expectations, free from conditions, and based on compassion and the desire for the well-being of others. So that's the difference between the two. And we can see that this, especially in terms of how it binds us, how it controls us, how it leads to fear, anger as well, how this therefore robs us of our freedom and causes a lot of problems also when it comes to our relationships with others. So that's attachment. And then there's another one, aversion, also a very important afflictive emotion, very harmful afflictive emotion that leads to a lot of suffering. It can manifest, if it gets stronger, in the form of hostility, hatred. It leads to conflicts. It drives our harmful actions and reinforces dissatisfactions. And again, as previously with attachment, it exaggerates. It's an exaggerated or it involves an exaggerated or distorted perception. So it arises when the mind attributes excessive negativity to an object. So different to attachment, which attributes excessive positivity. Here, aversion attributes excessive negativity to an object. It magnifies its undesirable qualities or aspects while disregarding its positive or neutral aspects. So a particular negative quality or set of qualities are exaggerated or even projected. They may not even be there in the first place. And these qualities are no longer seen as just a part of the object. So let's take a person. They're no longer seen as a part of the person, but identical with them to the extent that their positive qualities are ignored. Okay. So again, it manifests in the form of hostility, hatred can give rise to lots of unwholesome actions. It also causes a type of restlessness and tension. It actually puts our mind into a state of stress. So when we talk about stress is harmful, stress harms our body, harms our mind. Well, aversion is a good example of a mental state that creates stress. It again is an obstacle to mental freedom. Once we're controlled by anger, we have very little freedom, similar to attachment. And we also need to distinguish between aversion and a realistic recognition of negative qualities. So attachment, of course, stems from an uncontrolled emotional resistance to certain unpleasant qualities, while this realistic recognition of negative qualities is aware of these qualities but remains calm and unbiased. So in that way, these are just two examples. Now I mentioned definitely the scientific aspect that's very much in accordance with the Buddhist aspect or the modern psychological explanation. And then very specifically, the different characteristics of at least aversion and attachment from a Buddhist point of view, which leads me to dependent origination. All right. So this important topic, which is usually described in terms of three different aspects. The first being dependence on causes and conditions. Here, causes really means main causes, and condition means uh, secondary conditions, secondary causes. So main causes are described as causes, and secondary causes are described as conditions. And it refers to anything that is impermanent, anything that changes, that is produced by causes and conditions. So the self, we ourselves, other people, our body, the environment, everything, all experiences, every situation, everything we attach to, everything we're angry with, all these are impermanent. And from a Buddhist point of view, both the material and the mental world arise in dependence on countless causes and conditions. Okay. So for instance, and I'm already kind of hinting in the kind of direction that I'm trying to take this, how an understanding of just the first type of dependent origination or dependent arising can reduce, for instance, anger, aversion, and so forth. So take, for example, a person who tends towards aggression, who's quickly aggressive, quickly uh, violent, very angry. Well, actually, from a Buddhist point of view, this aggressiveness is not inherent in them. It's not their nature as such, but it's a characteristic that is the result of a series of causes and conditions. For instance, there are biologically determined predispositions. For instance, the kind of, I don't know, DNA that comes from the parents, there's certain predispositions. I'm not saying they're born as an angry baby, but there's certain predispositions. Then the environment in which they grew up and the mental tendencies that they developed in previous lives or even in this life. So, therefore, there are all these causes and conditions that are responsible for this person being aggressive, being violent, and so forth. And then, of course, you have the material world. Here, I just described more of a person, but modern science, for instance, physics, biology, all of these disciplines teach exactly that dependent or arising or dependence on causes and conditions. Now, you know all this. There's no need to go into details on this. I may give an example, one or two examples, but why am I mentioning it in the first place? Well, because what I'm speaking about is supposed to be something we internalize and something we practice, we habituate our mind with. And so even though everything I'm going to talk about you actually know already, thinking about it, especially in a kind of meditative kind of setting, affects the mind very differently. We sometimes have a sense, oh, there's nothing new to it, so why should I even think about this? I know all this. Why should, like in a meditation, for instance, when you do an analytical meditation, if you go through, you force yourself basically to go through all these different aspects. What does physics say? What does biology say about dependence on causes and conditions? What does chemistry say? And just briefly go through it. it has a much more powerful effect on the mind during this, to actually take the time to go through it. It gives you a much fuller sense. Everything is dependent on causes and conditions. When I'm saying everything, means everything that's really part of our reality on a daily basis. So, taking physics, for instance, just quickly, a ball, for instance, moves because someone pushes it. So that's the main cause. That's the kind of force, the main cause. Secondary condition, there's a passage free from any obstacles so that the ball can move. So simple as that. Then you have a light bulb. The main cause is the electricity that flows through the wire. And then the condition or the secondary cause is that the light bulb is connected to such a wire. So simply speaking, boiling water is dependent, of course, on the heat, but it also depends on the air pressure. So that's like a secondary condition. Now, if you think about this in physics, there's everything in physics. Everything comes into existence in dependence on main causes and cooperative conditions. All right. Same is true for chemistry, combustion. In Buddhism, actually, that example is also given. If you have, like, I don't know, you have something that is ignited, then you have fuel, and then there's combustion. You have a piece of wood, you have a match, a burning match, that leads to the burning of the wood. And what do you need as a secondary condition? Oxygen, for instance. So in that way, um, that's the chemical here, talking about just the chemical aspects. You can talk about it from a physical point of view, from a point of view of physics. But anyway, so that's just one example. Then yeast. Yeast rises. Well, you need sugar. Well, no, sugar is converted. It causes the dough to rise, but you must also have a certain temperature. That's the secondary condition. Anyway, so there's so many examples. I don't need to go through all of them, but if you take a few and get a sense on a level of physics, everything depends on causes and conditions. From a chemical point of view, everything depends on causes and conditions. Biology, of course, the germination of a seed, huge example in Buddhism. You have a seed, that's the main cause that gives rise to a sprout, but you also have cooperative conditions such as water. Muscle movement, also very important. Certain nerve impulses, the conditions are, I don't know, energy, for instance, oxygen again. So lots of examples when it comes to biologicals, the biological aspects of our world. And then there's the mind. In neuroscience, neuroscience talks a lot about learning, neuroplasticity. So repeated activity, for instance, in our neural networks, that's kind of the main cause to learn something, for instance, when learning a new language. And then as a secondary condition, you have neurotransmitters such as dopamine and so forth that make that process possible, to put it simply. Then in psychology, in modern psychology, being able to cope with stress. How do you cope with stress, for instance? So when a person experiences a high workload or social conflict, they may be able to, so a cause for them to cope with this is their individual resilience, having certain coping strategies, and secondary conditions would be maybe the people they live with, the social environment that helps them, or a previous experience that helps them to more effectively cope with this stressful situation. Or the motivation to learn something, to successfully learn something. So the main cause is, of course, the inner motivation to have the genuine interest to learn something without being guided by social pressure, for instance. And the cooperative conditions are that they can deal with failure, and they have possibly external support like teachers, family, and so forth, a good learning environment. So in that way, therefore, everything is dependent. Our mind, our body, our environment is dependent on causes and conditions. And there are different types of causes and conditions. Some are direct, have a direct impact, some only an indirect impact. Some transform into something, while others assist this they're like a substantial cause that is described as it's called, and then there are cooperative conditions that help the substantial cause to transform into something. Then you have primary and secondary causes. More important causes, for instance, our experiences, are mainly the result of karmic actions, but there are also secondary causes that are responsible for these karmic actions to manifest in certain experiences. There's also something you find in the second chapter of the Pramanavartika. So those of you who studied this chapter, you may remember special indispensable causes, something called special indispensable causes, which are such that the quality of the cause has an effect on the result. So the quality of water has an effect on the seed that then transforms into a sprout. Well, the quality of the gardener, whether they're sick or healthy, it doesn't matter as long as they plant the seed, you're going to have a sprout. Of course, if they do a bad job, that's different. But in general, doing the same activity, it doesn't matter whether they're healthy or not. When they engage in the same activity, they don't necessarily have the same kind of effect on the quality of the result, as opposed to the fertilizer and the water, which have a very specific effect on the resultant sprout. So we learn about these different causes, the different conditions that give rise to something. But the point is that everything, we ourselves, other people, every situation arises from causes and conditions. So in summary, whatever is impermanent cannot arise without a cause. And that also means that our cosmos, our universe, did not arise through the intelligent design of a creator. So that would be just one entity. Whereas from a Buddhist point of view, that one entity that's usually seen as permanent, well, that doesn't make sense because the emergence of impermanent phenomena from something permanent and unchanging doesn't make sense. So impermanent phenomena can only be caused by something impermanent. And those causes that give rise to something must be of a certain kind. You don't get olive oil from grains of sand, for instance. You can press them as long as you want. You won't get olive oil, as an example. Or an orange seed will not give rise to an orange to an apple tree. And it's also a basic principle of reality that a multitude of specific effects always arise from a multitude of specific causes. So nothing arises just from one cause. And everything that causes something has never just one effect or one result, but many results. Okay. And so since phenomena, the last one is also since phenomena arise from causes and conditions, they are impermanent. They change all the time. Nothing remains the same, even though it may seem that way. All right. Now, this was just a crash course in dependence on causes and conditions. It was just a quick explanation, which, as I said, if you really want to deepen your understanding of this, it's helpful to take in not just the Buddhist explanations, but also the explanations you find in modern science. It makes the result more complete. You get a fuller sense. Oh, yes, everything is dependent on causes and conditions. Nothing just pops up on its own without causes and conditions. And here I'm talking about the objects of our afflictions, of course. Why? Because an understanding of this can reduce our afflictions. For instance, our aversion. We really understand that. How can that reduce our aversion? Which, for instance, throughout one day, a single day, we may experience aversion again and again throughout the day. This bothers us, and this person annoys us, and so forth. But if you think about it, if we really take the time to reflect on the object, for instance, usually we're angry with a particular person, even though it's their behavior that annoys us, but we're annoyed with the person themselves. The behavior is secondary, it's the person we're annoyed with. But if we think about the causes and conditions that gave rise to their behavior, in the long term, of course, they're the result of their upbringing, their experiences, their physiological predispositions, and so on. So they weren't born that way. They may have had some tendencies, yes, but if they behave now in a certain way that really, I mean, maybe they're a serial killer even or whatever, they rob banks. I mean, no one is born that way, but there's certain causes and conditions that gave rise to the person being the way they are. This doesn't condone this, but this we don't condone their behavior. I'm not saying it's okay, but there's at least an understanding, and there's no sense this person is naturally evil because they can't be naturally evil. It's causes and conditions that give rise to their behavior. And it's good to reflect on the fact that if we had been exposed to the causes and conditions they were exposed to, can we know for certain we wouldn't behave in the same way? So, therefore, it's good to reflect on that, on the fact that others are the result of causes and conditions. And maybe just in that moment, if they behave in an obnoxious way, maybe they had a crappy day, like a crappy morning, everything went wrong, and I don't know, they just suffered the loss of a close person, they lost their job, or whatever just happened. Usually people have a reason for acting in a certain way. And even if it's just they're totally controlled by their selfish mind, which is terrible. I mean, being extremely selfish is not a peaceful and satisfactory experience. So, in that way, if we reflect on all this, it can definitely at least reduce our aversion, this anger, this aggression we may experience in that moment. And the more we familiarize with that, the more we're likely to feel in that moment when that annoyance arises, when the anger comes. Oh, wait a minute. Who knows what happened to them in the morning? Who knows what they've just gone through? And right away, we can breathe again. We can act in a way that is rational instead of just acting out on our emotions. So the point is, the more we do this, the more we control our aversion. And this is only the first type of dependence. But yes, to really internalize the fact everything arises, the other person, their mind, every situation. Of course, I've created in every moment, I've created the causes for the situation because it's not that it just randomly arises, that there's no cause for it. Well, the main cause was basically what I did to someone else. That should always be in the back of our mind. That is so helpful because we don't feel like some kind of paralyzed victim, but rather, oh, okay, there's a reason for that. I'll be more careful in the future because I don't want to create a similar cause again in the future by getting angry now in that situation and maybe lashing out and so forth. But also to remember the other person. They are a result of causes and conditions, and there's often very little freedom. Okay. Then also arrogance. If we suffer from arrogance, and we may call ourselves or we may think of ourselves as a humble person, but I'm sure we all have our moments of feeling, oh, I can do this better, feeling arrogant. That doesn't mean we have to always be arrogant, but that's just part of human nature to sometimes feel superior to others, feeling our successes are more meaningful, are more important than those of others. And so that kind of arrogance, if I think about it, it's because of so many others. If I've achieved anything, well, then because there were others. I mean, my parents first, who taught me the most basics, like being able to speak, for instance, being able to walk and talk and so forth. And then there are all the teachers involved in teaching me how to, whatever, read and write and so forth. And whatever my success is, I needed others. If I'd been born in a, I don't know, in a bubble and been raised, I mean, besides the fact I wouldn't have survived, but even if I hypothetically had survived, without others, none of the successes that I feel arrogant about are just the result of my own hard work. They're the result of the work of so many other people. So I should be arrogant also when it comes to the other people who helped me, who were also responsible, because I feel like, wow, I worked so hard. I achieved this. Well, we achieved it all together. So that's another way to look at understanding, or it's another way how an understanding, a true internalizing of dependence on causes and conditions can significantly reduce arrogance. And then attachment. What about attachment? Well, if we're attached to something, usually when we're attached to something, we try to hold on to it. We want it to remain the same. If we're attached to a relationship, things are going well, we want it to remain the same. If we're attached to particular objects, we want them to be as shiny and beautiful and well working as they are right now. We don't want them to change, to break, and so forth. But if we become more familiar with dependence on causes and conditions, we become more familiar with impermanence. That holding on to things out of attachment is like trying to hold on to quicksand. As we hold on to it, the sand just flows through our fingers, and there's nothing to hold on to. Or holding on to water, trying to build a castle on quicksand. I mean, a lot of analogies that I used. So just the simple fact that everything is constantly changing, even if we're not aware of it, because things are dependent on causes and conditions. So each moment is a cause and a condition of a next moment, and then again of a next moment. So the self I am right now, the person I am right now, gives rise to the person in the next moment. Of course, there are other conditions. There's you, there's all of you, there's the environment, there's the food I eat, and there's the present moment of the I, and all of them coming together give rise to the next moment of the I, which in turn then um, functions as the cause of the next moment. And they're all slightly different because the external conditions are different, my thoughts are different, my mind is different, my body is different, and the I is therefore different. So everything is constantly changing. What is there to hold on to? What is there really to hold on to? And again, indirectly through reflecting on causes and conditions or dependence on causes and conditions, in that indirect way, we come to understand that everything is constantly changing, which reduces attachment. And then when it comes to envy, we envy another person. We're not happy that they have a particular success. But then if we reflect on it, well, this other person has simply created the causes and conditions for whatever I envy, or whatever we envy them for. So they've created the causes and conditions for that. Well, I haven't, not yet. So if therefore I rejoice instead of feeling envious, um, then this joy gives us the energy, gives us the strength, because joy, that kind of joy, and when we rejoice, that kind of joy gives us strength, gives us the energy to create then the necessary causes and conditions to achieve exactly the same. While on the other hand, envy, it paralyzes us. It makes us feel miserable. It drains us of all our energy to do the same. We're just miserable that the other person has what we want to get. And so we're much less likely to achieve the same, to create the same causes and conditions. And of course, there's good old ignorance by reflecting on causes and conditions. Well, there cannot be a kind of permanent autonomous self that is the center of the universe. And I'm not going more into it. As I said in the beginning, I'm not even going into emptiness, but no, just the sense of this permanent I. Well, actually, there are many different causes and conditions that determine what kind of mind we have, what kind of body we have, and there is no place for such singular, concrete, permanent self. It's just, it doesn't make any sense, even if it feels that way. Even if it feels the I that woke up this morning and the I that is still here talking to you is the same, doesn't make any sense. That is just a wrong perception. And again, by reflecting in detail on causes and conditions, this can become clear. All right. And then there's course, there are good positive qualities, really good for our psyche. Modern science very much supports the importance of these qualities. Gratitude. Gratitude is seen in modern psychology, is seen as such a healthy quality for so many reasons. And I don't need to go into it. It definitely calms us. It brings joy. It motivates us. It helps our relationships with others because we are grateful for what others have done for us. Because really everything positive, the things we enjoy on a daily basis, our material possession, the money we have to spend, our education, the food we buy and eat, our job, all this is because there are others. Because there are others. There are other people who make the money, who create the jobs, who grow the food we eat, and so forth. So this really going into this, the fact that everything positive I enjoy and being able to create positive qualities such as gratitude is because there are others I can be grateful for. Love and compassion. If there weren't others, these positive qualities, generosity, I couldn't develop them. So therefore, gratitude is an important quality I can develop based on my understanding of my insight into the fact that everything depends on causes and conditions. And of course, love and compassion um, are other qualities I can generate as a result of that. Sentient beings want to be happy and satisfied, but unfortunately, they constantly create the causes and conditions for experiencing problems, for of course, creating problems for others, but because of doing that, they also create so many problems for themselves. They just simply want to be happy and peaceful and, well, always or oftentimes, most of the time, because of not knowing, create the causes of the opposite. So that is truly a reason to feel compassion. And another, of course, important quality we can develop is humility. The fact we're not really different from others. We are the result of causes and conditions. Our mind, our body is created by the actions, of course, in the past. We are controlled by our afflictions, so are others, by our mental afflictions, harmful emotions, harmful views, and so are others. And there's no reason why we're more superior than anyone else. Again, all this helps us to all these this principle of dependence on causes and conditions helps us to truly grasp this. All right. So that's one aspect. I'm just checking the time. When did I start? Ooh, I've got no time to talk about the next part. I was going to go a little bit into what is actually of the different causes and conditions, what is more dominant? Is it the mind or is it the material? Is it the body, for instance? And of course, here modern science definitely has so many examples of where it's mind over body. So maybe just to you can all look them up and you're all familiar with them. So think of placebo, the placebo effect. Medication helps because of your idea that it will help you. So placebo. What else? So these are kind of psychosomatic kind of events. Nocebo would be the opposite of believing medicine doesn't work, doesn't help, and it actually doesn't in some cases. Meditation, of course, is a very good example where you mentally meditate, and that has an incredibly positive effect on your body, on your brain, on your body. How laughter, laughing and humor are extremely helpful when it comes to dealing with stress, with dealing with problems. Optimism, very, very helpful. Faith and spirituality, again, psychologically, have an extremely positive effect on our body, just on our body, on our heart rate, on our blood pressure, and so forth. There's certain visualization techniques that help us to heal quicker, and so forth. The list is endless. Now, again, when we talk about causes and conditions, so material causes and conditions, and mental are more important, are more powerful if we can use the mental in an effective way, which again brings us in the direction where Buddhism is going, where, of course, mind dominates over the body. And if we learn to control our mind, if we learn to use this mental potential we all have, we can learn to control our body in an incredibly effective way. Anyway, without having the time to really go into this, I'd like to go now into the next aspect, which is the dependence on parts. This is the next type of dependent arising, dependence on parts. So this is basically saying that everything that exists is a whole, WHOLE, a whole that consists of parts, that it has parts. Now, saying everything has parts, I'm not referring to necessarily physical parts. Of course, that doesn't make sense because not everything is physical. But first of all, everything has certain characteristics. Everything um, has has parts such as, for instance, is permanent or impermanent. Maybe something else I should mention before I get more into it. So when we say everything has parts, everything has properties and so forth, um, in the strictest sense of the word, being part of something means that something exists as a distinct but connected entity that is a whole, as I just said, and its parts are smaller components that together with other parts form this whole. But in a metaphorical sense, the problem is that it sometimes can be misunderstood. We sometimes talk about being part of something. So that can express belonging or participation in a larger context. So, for instance, we may say, this person is an important part of my life. Okay, that's okay. But saying my children are a part of me, that is not literally the Buddhist way by which we're talking about everything has parts. A child is not literally a part of me. It can be a part of my identity, but that's slightly different. So a whole kind of means if me, I as a person, I'm made of mind and body. I'm made of a body and I'm made of a mind. Those are my parts. And again, when we think of modern science, it's so fascinating when we think of the body. Modern science talks a lot about the body, not as much about the mind as it talks about the body. So here again, who am I? Who am I? I'm a whole. I'm a self. I'm a person. But what are these parts? What are these properties I'm made of? What is this body I'm made of? And so, for instance, in modern science, we learn that we are made of an enormous amounts of cells. Um, I think it's about 28 to 36 trillion of cells we're made of. And there are different types of cells, of course. And all these cells are made of each cell, forget exactly how it is. I think it's 10 to the power of 13. So one with 13 zeros of atoms. Each cell we have is made of 10 to the power of 13 atoms. So incredibly large amount of atoms, countless, as in Buddhism, you would call it like a countless amount of atoms. So that is fascinating that we're made up of all these constantly changing cells, which in turn are made of these constantly changing atoms. But not just that. What is also very interesting is that in addition to human cells, our body hosts many microorganisms, especially bacteria. And in the past, scientists used to think that the ratio was, the ratio of bacteria to human cells was about 10 to 1. So 10 human cells to 1 bacteria. But now they've come to the understanding that the ratio is closer to 1 to 1, meaning that the number of bacterial cells in our body is approximately equal to the number of our own cells. So is this really our own body? Half of it doesn't even belong to us. It belongs to other organisms. So the fact that our body doesn't completely consist of like there are all these other organisms that live together in this body. And then, of course, when you think about, and where does the body start? Where does it end exactly? On a molecular, on an atomic level? Like they encroach on my personal space. Like, where does that actually start, that personal space? And yeah, where do I start? If someone touches me, what actually happens in that moment? It may make me so angry when they touch me, but do they actually touch any of my atoms, any of my molecules? Really think about it. On such a scientifically well established level, things are not as clear cut as they usually seem. And the sense we have of this clear cut, concrete way, well, that gives rise to certain afflictions such as anger, attachment, etc. But again, if we think about it in more detail, it doesn't always make sense, or it doesn't make any sense to have these reactions. But anyway, so us as a person having this body, half of it are other organisms, half of it is actually us, consisting of trillions of different cells and even more different atoms. And then there's the mind, our consciousness. So many different types of awareness, consciousness, constantly changing. So here, when we talk about the mind, we're looking at the present moment, but we're also looking at the mind as a continuum. The mind operating on both conscious and subconscious level. That's even scarier. I mean, there's a lot happening on a conscious level, but there's so much happening on an unconscious level. We're not even aware of that it's happening. There are at least 6 types of consciousness, so including the sense consciousness that perceives different objects. So you have the 5 sense consciousnesses, always perceiving different objects all the time. Different objects are perceived. And then there's the mental consciousness, which consists of different thoughts and ideas. It manifests as boredom, as fear, as worry, as happiness, as love, so many different mental states. It includes both coarser levels that we are aware of, conscious levels, and of course the subtler level, which we call the subconscious level, that many of which remain unnoticed. So many different types of minds that remain unnoticed, or we can only become aware of later on. As part of our mind, there are thought patterns, there are afflictive minds that they're influenced by our mental afflictions and that influence our actions. There are virtuous minds that are rooted in positive qualities such as love and compassion. And then there are neutral types of minds that are neither virtuous nor afflicted. The mind also has parts, in the sense, not spatial parts, but it always has an object. The mind always has a particular object. If you don't think of anything, then it's nothingness. You nothingness is the object of your mind. Or if you reflect on what you did this morning, well, then it's through memory that the things we did this morning arise in the mind. Then the mind, on top of the different objects that usually appear or don't have to appear, can appear, don't have to appear. On top of that, the mind also performs certain actions. It perceives something, it reflects on an object, it doubts things, it habituates itself, it understands something, it recognizes something. So these are all part of the mind. And that's who we are as a person. Simply speaking, again, I need to race through it a little bit because we don't have that much time. But if you take the time and reflect on who you are as a person, who are others in the same way, made up of this very sophisticated or very complicated mind, a body, first of all, but then also a very complicated mind, which is different from moment to moment, sometimes happy, sometimes unhappy, sometimes kind, sometimes rude. So if you really reflect, if we go into details, we look closer. Who am I? Who are others? That again helps us to reduce, similarly as before, our afflictions such as hatred, anger, etc. So, for instance, take self-hatred. Previously, I talked about the hatred towards another person. We can also talk about that kind of hatred or aversion, but if we think about our own uh, self-hatred that we sometimes may experience, or aversion, for instance, well, what we do is we focus on just one aspect. We take one particular, maybe failure, one particular weakness or inability or whatever it is that causes that self-hatred and totally ignore the rest. But we're so much more than just that failure. We're so much more than just, I don't know, the things we cannot do or we haven't achieved yet. So, therefore, to take the time and to really work with the self-hatred, which is so disruptive, which is so destructive as well, because we cannot fully experience love and compassion for others if we don't experience it for ourselves. And therefore, it's important to take the time. Okay, so I'm this complicated entity. Physically, all right, maybe there are body parts that I don't like, but again, it's like they're just cells in the end. Like, I don't know, there's certain body shape that I have a sense it's so truly wonderful and needs to be there. And of course, for ignoring causes and conditions and ignoring that there's so much more to what I am, it may result in self-hatred, low self-esteem, and so forth. Um, I'm not saying this is easy, but if we make the time and we really reflect on causes and conditions, but more importantly, here on the parts who we are. We're so much more than the shape of our behind or the shape of our noses, or and I mean, even like how do we look at other people? Is the shape of their behind or their, I don't know, their legs, their arms, their noses most important, or their mind? And of course, that's the one thing we can actually change right now, at least our mental consciousness. Our body at this point, yeah, certain changes we can make, but it's not as effective as the changes we can make to our mental consciousness. And that's usually part of who we really are, how others look at us. Kind, selfish, aggressive, patient, humble. That's really what counts. The first impression is really just that first impression. But in the long term, what is important now? What is important in for our social interactions and for our future is our mental consciousness. And that's where it's really important to look at. And when it comes to self-hatred, to also see the positive, to see that there's room for improvement because there are positive qualities we can enhance. And fortunately, because of causes and conditions, the negative ones can definitely be first reduced, but in the long term, actually be eliminated. So, therefore, anger directed at ourselves, there are so many opportunities, there's so much potential that this self-hatred really doesn't make sense. And when it comes to others, remember in the beginning I talked about anger? Not only does it exaggerate the negative qualities of another person, but it sees that negativity and the other person as one, which they are not. They have positive qualities such as others have as well, maybe less, or maybe in a different in an area that I don't think is important, but nonetheless, it's important to see the person for who they are, the bad, but also the good qualities. And when we do that, anger and aversion will have a hard time uh, remaining in our mind. In fact, they disappear if we look at the person in a more fuller, in a fuller way. In particular, reflect on the fact that they all have the potential, everyone, how terrible they may be, how terrible the things that they may do, they all have the potential to become just like the Buddha. And to remember that and respect them at least for that. So that's also another way to reduce our anger, which of course harms us and doesn't harm the other person. Of course, we may do things that harm the person, but those actions and that anger that gives rise to these actions harms us a lot more than this other person. Then the same goes for attachment. When we have attachment towards a certain person, well, let's look at also their weaknesses. Let's not do what attachment usually does. Don't see the whole person any longer. The positive quality that we attach to, or that is the reason we're attached to the person, is seen as one with the person. It's exaggerated, it's blown up to such a degree that we cannot no longer see the whole person with their weaknesses, with their inabilities, and so forth. So to take the time, if we feel we're really obsessed about a person, we're so attached to them, look at them from a slightly different perspective. To be careful, of course, that it doesn't turn into anger and aversion, but just to see them more fully for who they are, or the object that I'm so attached to, what it does to the environment, what it does to my brain. If I'm, for instance, very attached to, I don't know, technical gadgets, well, I'm no longer using my mind to do certain things. I'm just getting the computer to do it, for instance, or my phone that I waste so much time just constantly obsessing over. Well, is it really that wonderful and important? Or can I also see its flaws? Because everything that has positive qualities, well, in general, also has flaws. Then when it comes to arrogance, I mean, I feel so arrogant about one quality, but I have so many weaknesses. What is there to feel so full about myself? I can rejoice in my positive qualities, of course, but it's important to also be aware of what needs to be improved. So in that way, these are just some examples. Um, it gives us a better sense of who we actually are, of what others are, dependence on parts. If you really reflect on what makes another person, what are their functions, their activities, I mean, functions is a bit of a weird word. It's the Tibetan word that is used. But who am I? In what sense am I really more important or not, more precious or not? On one hand, we can use the understanding of dependence on parts to enhance our self-acceptance, self-confidence, but also to reduce arrogance, as one example. And I'm sure you can come up with lots of other ways, like through your understanding of this type of dependent arising, you'll be able to see other ways in which you can reduce negative or harmful, afflictive kind of emotions or afflictive mental afflictions and enhance positive ones. There's also another dependence that is included in dependence on parts. If it wasn't included, I wouldn't know where else to include it into. So it needs to be mentioned because it's not strictly speaking dependence on parts, but it's still very important. So because things are not only dependent on causes and conditions, they're not only dependent on thoughts, as we'll come to later on, like I'll discuss it, the last type of dependence on concepts and thoughts, but it's also dependent on opposites. So long is dependent on short, short is dependent on long, hot is dependent on cold, and cold is dependent on um, hot. So these kind of opposites. And not just that, there's even more of a dependence. For instance, who we are in terms of our relationship with others. So we are a brother or a sister in relation to a sibling. We're a daughter or a son in relation to parents. We're a grandson or granddaughter. So who we are a friend in relation to this person we call our friend. And again, that's all dependent as part of our identity. So they're not part of us, not part in the sense of the way the word is used. Usually part is saying like this is like it makes me a whole, like the person I am right now, with mind and body, that's a part of me, right? I'm not talking about the other person as a cause. They affected me. Yes, that's different. They could affect me through things they have said in the past, etc. But that is more dependence on causes and conditions. But who I am right now, right here and right now, that is determined by parts that are either of a physical nature and therefore part of my body, or of a mental nature and therefore part of my mind. Other people don't belong. They're not part in that sense, not in the strictest sense or in the Buddhist sense. Okay, but it's still that independence on, as I said, on a friend. I see myself as a friend. It's part of my identity. Independence on my parents. I see myself as a daughter or a son, and so forth. That is also part of this category. That's the second type of dependence, so dependence on parts. But now, the most important, and that's why I raced a little bit through the first two types, the most important is dependence on, here I call it concepts and thoughts. Sometimes it's described as dependence on names and conceptual consciousness. Name and thought, concepts and thoughts. Okay. So what does this mean from a Buddhist point of view? So based on the different parts that make up a phenomenon, as I described earlier, spatial parts, possible parts in time, a former moment, a later moment, certain functions, certain activities, we label and designate the things around us. That's the Buddhist view. So we make feel like a big deal. Yeah, okay. So, for instance, the dependence on the legs of a table, for instance, the surface of a table, and independence on the way we use it, we call something a table. So it depends on its legs, its surface, and the way we use this particular object, we designate table. But our problem is that then, after we labeled, for instance, table, we believe that it is called a table because it's already a table. When in reality, it's a table only because we've designated as such. All right. Having said this, I'm tempted to go more into emptiness, but that's not what I want to do today. I just want to put it out there, but also bring in again modern science. As I did with the other two, well, it depends on parts. I didn't really talk about modern science, but what is there to say? I mean, yeah, sure. Physics talks about parts, chemistry talks about parts, psychology talks, yes. But here, this is very, very, very interesting how there's a lot of modern understanding of how concepts shape our perception. Having a concept of something. So, what is the concept? I have a concept of table. So, really, the here when I say the concept of table, so table, I have an idea of what a table is. So when I say table, when I think about a table, it may be the word table that I think about. So then the concept becomes the word. It may be an image. But anyway, I have developed a concept of what a table is. My mind has, based on certain characteristics, the way I use it, there's the parts that I perceive. On that basis, my mind has developed or has designated table. It has developed the concept of table. Does that make sense so far? I hope that's clear. Okay. So in modern science, and here I'm just basically not quoting it, yeah, but it's a kind of a summary of what I've, in a way, it's kind of, I'm quoting that from different psychological papers. I just basically brought it, some of the papers I read, I brought them together. And so to summarize it, so concepts are like small drawers, like a drawer, like a small drawer or small box in your brain where we sort our experiences and knowledge. So they help us to understand the world, by providing a framework for interpreting information. When we learn a new concept, it changes how we see the world, in other words. So basically, when you think of when you were little, I mean, there was really nothing we knew, and we don't even remember that time. It was so different to how we perceive the world now. As children, I don't know, all we perceive was probably a blur of shapes and colors. It's hard to tell. I mean, I don't remember. But we slowly learn to make sense of the things around us. We put things in different boxes. Oh, that is called table. Of course, we learned to put it into boxes through language. As human beings, we learned it through language. So we were told certain characteristics, a certain way we use an object, we call it table. We call this chair. Okay, so in that way, our mind has learned to naturally organize sensory input into recognizable patterns, allowing us to make sense of the world around us efficiently. And we still do this. We instinctively group similar elements, detect relationships between parts, and we also perceive incomplete forms as complete. I mean, we never really see the whole table. We never see the whole chair. But to us, it's like, oh, it's a whole chair. It's a whole. We make sense of we kind of replace the bits and pieces we can't see. Oh, there's Bob, but I only see Bob's face kind of peeking over a wall. I'm saying, oh, there's Bob. So in my mind, the whole of Bob appears, although what I perceive is only a part of it. This tendency to structure information helps us to navigate our environment. We can make sense of the environment, but, and that's the problem, it can lead to a lot of biases, racism, for instance, and a lot of misperceptions. And this is where Buddhism comes in. But I'm not really getting into this now. I'm still talking about what modern psychology, for instance, tells us about concepts. So concepts, these different boxes we've created, how we categorize the world, it doesn't merely shape how we think. It does that as well, but it also determines how we interact with the world. So these boxes, they act as kind of invisible filters. They guide our perceptions, they shape our experiences, and they influence our decisions. So they act as filters. I can only see chair. I don't see all the details. I may look at a door that was open one moment and closed the next. So I'm not aware of the changes. I only perceive door. So to me, it's the same door. So in a sense, we put on the label, but as I said earlier, we forget that we put on the label that in and of itself, this is neither a door nor anything else. But to us, it seems, because we use the label door, that there's this doorness. It is a door. This is why we call it a door. And we also fail to see the differences from moment to moment, and therefore it becomes an obstacle to perceiving the impermanence, the constant change. We also forget that we just see a certain part of the world, that in our mind we then replace the bits and pieces that do not appear to, at least to our senses. And they guide our perception. I'll explain that in a moment. They shape our experiences. That becomes clear. And of course, influence our decisions. Now, first of all, cultural differences are very important here because the concepts we learned, the concept we focused on, they determine our perception, for instance. So what's considered to be beautiful in one culture may be perceived as unattractive in another, right? Beauty, ugliness, attractiveness, not unattractiveness, very much determines by the concepts that I've learned. Take colors. Colors have different meanings in different cultures. So in Western cultures, white is often considered a color of purity, while in some Asian cultures is the color of mourning, right? In some cultures. Okay. While in Western cultures, black is a color of mourning. So these are just simple kind of examples. And of course, there's sometimes overlap. It's not that clear cut. But for instance, we may have the concept of like a luxury brand in our mind. And so we must perceive products as like having a certain of this particular brand as having a higher quality and being more expensive. So the way we look at things is so much determined by um, the culture we grew up in. But how do concepts influence our perception? Well, they direct our attention, first of all. For example, if we have the concept of tree in mind, if we're familiar with the tree, we're more likely to notice the things that resemble a tree. And if we don't have a concept of the things around the tree, we're less likely to notice them. So you see, first of all, we perceive things, we label them, but then these labels determine what we see. If you take it to an extreme, well, we learn to make sense of the world around us. When we were little, I guess we were basically like a person who has always been blind, but then suddenly comes to see, right? We see things, but we can't make sense of them. Whereas over time, we put things into different categories and boxes. And then as we go around the world, we perceive, oh, this is a table, this is a chair, this is this object, this is that. But we learned how to we learned how to understand the dimension, like with three-dimensional perception. We learned to interpret shadows and distances and so forth in order to be able to navigate through a room without bumping into objects. But what is very fascinating are examples of people who've been blind since birth and now through some surgery there are actually examples of people who, through the development through modern science, are able to, or modern science can cure them of their blindness, the cause of their blindness. And these people, when they talk about their experiences, they're pretty much saying they don't see anything. They're just these things like colors and shapes, but I can't make any sense of them. There's one example I'm thinking of, this documentary I saw of this guy who at the age of 50 he was cured of his blindness, and it was a scary world. He couldn't really see things, and he kept using his stick because he still couldn't really see things. So it shows that at a very small age we learned how to make sense of the world around us and to notice certain things if we had a concept of them. Concepts also influence how we interpret what we see. So, if we encounter someone with a stern expression, for instance, and associate it with aggression, we might interpret their behavior as hostile. But actually, in some cultures, um, I remember once there's some Koreans came to the Institute of Buddhist Dialectics, and they looked so stern, so serious. And I was like, ooh, they're kind of hostile. That was my impression. But later on, I learned that no, this is just part of the culture, especially for men. It's a sign of I don't know, it's like a grace or whatever, that guys don't necessarily are smiley and look friendly. That doesn't mean they aren't very friendly and very humble, but it's just part of the culture. And I totally misinterpreted that. And of course, like I said, also our concepts, they determine our expectations. So when we have a concept of restaurant, well, there's something for instance, we expect certain things like tables and chairs and menus. And these expectations, of course, influence how we behave in a restaurant and what we perceive. Now, all this shows us the concepts very much determine the concepts we learned when we were little and that we reinforce all the time, that they very much determine how we see the world. And my reality, therefore, that means that my reality is determined by my concepts. And when we talk about reality, there's my reality and there's everyone else's reality. Even if there were another reality, it doesn't matter because I don't perceive it and none of you perceive it, right? So when we talk about an objective reality from a Buddhist point of view, it doesn't even exist. But even if it did, I'm just aware of my subjective reality, and you're aware of your subjective reality. If there were such an objective reality, it would have no bearing on our experiences. So, therefore, everything I pay attention to, I expect, etc., I perceive is determined by my concepts. And where do they come from? Language. So, language is so fascinating. And again, modern psychology very much deals with that. So, there's something called the linguistic relativity. It's described as linguistic relativity in the sense that the language we speak is significantly influences our concepts and thus our perception of the world. So this was found, actually, this theory was developed by someone called Edward Sapir and his student Benjamin Whorf. So therefore, this hypothesis or this linguistic relativity is sometimes called, I think, Sapir-Whorf hypothesis. Anyway, this all goes back to, as I said, the language we speak, the fact that the language we speak, that influences our perception of things. So let's look at this idea. First of all, let's take time perception. I just took different examples. So for English speakers, we think, for instance, we say, or an English speaker would say, the future lies in front of us and the past lies behind us, right? We talk, we use these words in a lot of languages, like European languages. There is a particular language by the Aymara people. They're called, they primarily live in the areas of South America, Bolivia, Peru, and Chile. Well, they talk of time very differently. They say the past is in front and the future is behind. So they therefore have a different perception of time, with future being behind and but here behind for a different reason, but still their perception of time, according to certain studies, is quite different. The reason being that they have a sense of that because they say that the future is visible, so it's like it's in front of us. No, the future is not visible. The future is hidden to us, so it's like behind us, while the past is in front of us because we already know the past. We are already aware of the past, so it's like in front of us. But although there's no contradiction when it comes to this explanation, because of the language they use, it's come to the understanding of, I don't know, whoever did these studies, that they perceive time in a different way. Then when it comes to spatial orientation, apparently there's some Aborigines who they don't use left, right, front, and back, but they use the cardinal directions, north, south, east, and west, and therefore have a very different perception of things around them. They always know where east is, they always know where west is, and so forth. Then again, you have also the grammatical assignment of certain genders, which very much influences the way we perceive objects. So, for instance, the sun in German is female and the moon is male. But in a lot of Latin languages, it's the opposite. It's the opposite. So, the way I look at the sun, being born and raised German, it's got it's a feminine, it's something feminine. It's associated with maternal and nurturing qualities. Whereas in Latin countries, associated with Latin countries, it's associated with strength, energy, and activity. So that's quite fascinating how just the grammatical assignment of gender determines how we perceive certain objects. What is also really fascinating is how we perceive colors. So in some cultures, there's no word for blue, for instance. So there's no separate term. Blue or green is the same term. So there's one tribe in Namibia called the Himbas. They have no word for blue, but have many different words for green. And so studies have shown that they're unable to distinguish between blue and green because they don't have different words for them. Tibetans are very similar. They use they use the word, though, although they have a word for green, but everything is blue. Like they talk about blue vegetables, which is another way of saying green vegetables, or blue landscape. So it's to be seen whether there's really this ability to distinguish the different types of colors. I mean, especially in this Namibian tribe, it's very clear that they don't perceive the same colors that we perceive. Then there are words for certain emotions that if you have these words, you're more likely to be aware of them. Whereas if you're lacking these words, if they're not part of your language, you don't perceive them. So anyway, there's like a long list. I could go on and on and on. How the language we speak, the concepts basically we have learned, how they determine how we look at the world. So from a Buddhist point of view, it goes as far as saying that these concepts, they determine our reality. That everything exists as X, Y, and Z only because we have a concept of that, which taking it back, for instance, to the self, and without going into great details on this, the I, for instance, that is just a concept I use, my mind uses in relation to this mind and this body. But if you had another person's mind and body, it's in relation to their mind and body that they refer to themselves as I. So it's not like there's this I within me. It's basically just a concept I've developed in relation to my mind and body. And beyond that concept, it cannot be found as something intrinsically there that I have to support and I have to gratify by all means. Instead, it's an I amongst many I's, which are equally important, which are equally valid and equally precious. So I can see an hour and a half. I keep checking the time. So I wasn't able to go into all the details on labeling, but hopefully, based on some of the examples I gave, and hopefully based on what you've learned in the past, you have a better sense that dependent origination or dependent arising has these three aspects. So dependence on, of course, causes and conditions, dependence on parts, but most difficult, but most effective is the understanding of dependence on concepts, on making sense of this world by applying concepts, which helps us then to not just navigate in this world, but also helps us to perceive things which otherwise we wouldn't perceive. That takes us then to the Buddhist view that everything that exists only exists because we have labeled it. So a table is only a table because we call it a table. An I, the self, is only a self because we call it the self. And if we didn't have that label, there wouldn't be a table. And there wouldn't, we didn't have the concept of table, there wouldn't be a table. And if we didn't have the concept of I, there wouldn't be an I. All right. Now, how does it help us? How does this help us, again, as before, to reduce our afflictions? Well, I guess since I started with the I, all our afflictions, all our anger, aversion, and attachment, etc., they all come down to our exaggerated sense of this I. That is always at the forefront. My attachment to my I and to my happiness determines everything I do. I can almost say, I can say 100%. I mean, for someone who's like an advanced practitioner, it's different. But in my case, as an ordinary person, directly or indirectly, the self is always involved. And so to reflect on, and this is the most difficult types of dependence, but still extremely important, to reflect on the fact that this is I from my perspective, but this is other from someone else's perspective. And in the end, we all have arisen from causes and conditions. We're all made of parts, different minds, different consciousnesses. And because our consciousness in particular is intuitively wants to be happy and wants to be peaceful, therefore, just looking after myself and just looking after the well-being of this I and what is mine does not make any sense. Selflessness does not make any sense when it comes to reality, in particular when it comes to the lowest level, the highest level, I should say, the third level of dependent arising. All right, this was really short, and unfortunately, yeah, I didn't have the time to go into more detail. I hope I didn't uh, confuse you as part of this short explanation. I want to make some time for questions. If you have any questions, I know time is up actually, but you're able. I can stay on another half an hour if that's all right. And for those of you who need to leave or want to leave, you're welcome to do so. And if you want to ask a question, please raise your virtual hand. Yes, Neil, go ahead. Just unmute yourself. Yeah, perfect. Yeah. Oh, where's Neil?
Yeah, you were talking about attachment, and you also didn't mention too much about detachment. Is there a method to that? And I was reading some time ago about how even His Holiness mentioned that warm-heartedness and detachment, I think, are sort of not contrary.
And not contradictory. Yeah, warm-heartedness and detachment are not contradictory. Yes, absolutely. So attachment is just the opposite of detachment, right? Attachment is just the opposite of detachment. So detachment means, for instance, that I don't need the other person to make me happy. Let's put it this way. Love is a mind that wants the other person to be happy. Attachment is a mind that wants the other person to make me happy, right? So these are actually opposites. I'm less interested if I can of course sometimes have love for the person and at other times be attached. But both at the same time, I don't think you can have, because the mind has a very different goal, basically. The goal of love is the other person's happiness. The goal of attachment is my own happiness. So you may switch between the two, but you don't have one mind that can have both. Anyway, having said this, therefore, when we really love someone, when we have the sincere wish for that person to be happy, that kind of affection for them, so love is described as an affectionate mind that wishes the other person to be happy. That is the definition of love. In that moment, there's detachment. I guess you could say. Yes, in that moment, there must be some kind of detachment, in the sense that I'm not talking about a mental factor called detachment. I'm just talking about the absence of attachment in that moment, because your focus is not your own happiness, but the other person. Does that make sense? So in that moment, when you have sincere love for someone, and we can all have those moments, the problem is we have a hard time to lengthen these moments, or to make them, or to replace them totally for our attachment. But let's take that moment of love for the other person. Yes, in that moment, I don't think attachment for that person can be active. Does that answer your question, Neil? Yeah, great. Thank you. Okay, next person. Yes. Oh, I won't be able to pronounce your name.
Yeah, Ishani. I'm Ishani.
Ishani. Ishani. Oh, yes. No, yeah.
Okay. So, yeah, so just to extend this one, when you explained about attachment and love, the differences, and also you said that when you are attached with a particular object or a person, we tend to exaggerate the positive qualities and
Mhm.
ignore the negative ones. But then when we start looking at the you know the whole aspect of the person or the object, we start evaluating both the sides. But
Mhm.
then like how do you deal with that situation, as in so far you are totally attached to that person and you just elaborate on the person's or the object's positive qualities.
Mhm.
But when you start realizing that that person, he or she or an object, it is just an object or a person which may have both the qualities and which would have both the qualities,
Mhm.
then how do you mentally react and carry on, like loving, hating, liking, not
Mm.
liking?
Mm. Mm.
Hmm.
Okay, let me make sure I understand completely. So you're basically saying, okay, I have hatred towards someone, so I don't see their positive qualities, or I have attachment towards someone, so I don't see their negative qualities. So now I try to look at them and see them more fully for who they are. How is there still place for love and compassion, right? Yes, I mean, it seems like I may just look at the person maybe in a mechanical way, even I may see them, oh, they have good qualities, bad qualities, so big deal. Um, they're both, so they're not deserving of neither love nor anything, basically, right? There's like, but you don't look at people in such a mechanical way, but rather in a realistic way. So, for instance, the fact that they have a mind that has a lot of abilities. I mentioned Buddha nature as one example. So when we say positive qualities and negative qualities, we usually talk about worldly kind of things, right? Like just look at the person in a fuller sense. But even going beyond the worldly, we may even go as far as recognizing their incredible potential. So that goes beyond the ordinary, their quality, their potential to become a fully enlightened Buddha, for instance. So then appreciation and respect actually can come in. But also the fact that they want to be happy. Like everyone has this instinctive wish to be happy and satisfied. And actually, from a Buddhist point of view, everyone deserves to be happy. Everyone deserves to be happy. No one deserves to suffer, even if our actions of the past have created the causes for that. But that was out of not knowing. If I had known that, I don't know, whatever anger or whatever negative actions in the past I've accumulated that are responsible now for me to have certain problems, if I had known in the past, I wouldn't have done it. So it's out of our not knowing that we harm ourselves, basically, by harming others. So the idea is that everyone deserves to be happy. Everyone has the right to be happy. Everyone deserves to be happy. And thus, love makes sense. We're all connected to everyone else. Everyone has positive and lovable qualities. In fact, they have this incredible potential to become this enlightened, amazing being. So, therefore, they're deserving of my love and my compassion. That love and compassion benefits them, it benefits me. What argument am I left with to not have love and compassion for them? Right? So that would be my answer, that it's good for everyone involved. It just makes sense based on the way phenomena exist.
Yes,
Yeah.
totally. Yes.
Okay.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. All right. Next question. Are there any questions in the chat? Let me just quickly read the chat. No. Okay. Oops. All right. No more questions? Yeah.
I have a question.
Yes, please. Go ahead.
I was thinking of arrogance and perhaps opposite of that, or kind of feeling self-conscious.
Uh-huh.
And it almost seems like sometimes when I have these arrogant thoughts,
Mm-hmm.
I'm starting to realize that it's like from the deepest level, I'm kind of being very self-conscious about something that I'm like struggling to make sense out of. So like I'm kind of um like creating something.
Mm-hmm.
Does that make sense? So
Can you explain a little further? Just explain a little further.
Because I was wondering why I feel some pride or something
Right.
in
Okay.
recently, and then
Yeah.
when I go deeper into meditation and try to see why I'm feeling it, then I
Yes.
kind of start to realize it's kind of opposite of the pride. It's not like that I
Ah,
think that I am so great that I'm feeling this pride
ah,
and arrogance, but it's like opposite, that I don't have something, so I'm trying to create it. So is it possible
okay.
that your mind is kind of
Mm,
more that you see it, the more that you kind
mm.
of see the opposite of that, what you don't have? Does that make sense?
Okay, I don't know whether I understand. I think I understood one aspect. So let me start with this. From what I hear you saying, I'm not sure you had arrogance in the first place, right? Like when you said you were proud of something, because being proud, that's different. I mean, like arrogance is more like feeling superior to others, right? Arrogance is described as like I recognize a certain quality in me and I feel superior to others, right? And I would be upset if now, as a result of this quality, if someone were to not perceive it or were to say, I don't have this quality, it would upset me because I'm thinking, I'm kind of exaggerating that positive quality and I want everyone to recognize it. But that's different to pride. Like no, no, not pride, but being proud of something, feeling wow, that's more like a rejoicing, right? I have this quality and I'm happy about this quality. I recognize I can do something that maybe previously I felt I couldn't do, or previously I actually couldn't do in the first place. I can now do. So then thinking about what is it and I feel good about it, that's not arrogance. This, was that now more confusing or?
Yes, I agree. I understand. So the
Mm.
pride and arrogance, I see the difference, but
Yeah.
I think uh, I think it is arrogance that I feel.
Okay. All right.
Sometimes, like
Okay.
when I feel that, oh, I think I know, like especially when other people are telling me something, and I'm just like arrogant about, oh no, I think I'm right, or like you're
Ah,
wrong.
okay.
Like
Yeah.
this
Yeah.
kind of pride,
Yeah.
right?
Then okay, I agree. Okay.
Or
That would
arrogance,
be mhm.
or
Yeah.
yeah, I think
Yeah.
it's
Yeah.
more arrogance than pride. Yeah.
Okay. Then I haven't understood. So you're saying when you go deeper into it, you become more self-conscious of this,
Oh
and
no, I'm
then
not becoming more conscious. I think this arrogance, is it possible that because you're feeling opposite of it, that you're exaggerating to have this creation of emotions that to feel the
oh,
arrogance?
do you mean like if you have low self-confidence?
Yeah.
Ah,
Perhaps.
when you
Yeah.
have low, okay, okay, I understand. So when you have low self-confidence, oh yeah, yeah, yeah. That's a very interesting one you're saying because
Yeah.
we can have both. We can have low self-confidence, which can give rise to arrogance. You know, like I mean, we all suffer from a certain degree of low self-confidence, I believe. We all have our insecurities. And so it doesn't make us feel good. We feel bad in those moments. And it almost seems like our mind wants to balance that we have these moments we feel low about ourselves. And then when something positive arises, it's like, oh, but now I have a reason to feel good about ourselves. And the mind may actually exaggerate that. Do you see what I'm saying? It seems that that makes sense. So both are extremes. Both are extremes. One is an extreme aversion towards like almost like a resenting. Now resenting ourselves is not the same, but It's an extreme emotion. Low self-confidence is an extreme emotion, a negative emotion, in the sense that we exaggerate one thing we can't do and perceive our whole being as being that inability, right? Does that make sense? It exaggerates. It does exactly what anger does or attachment does, in the sense of exaggerating one particular failure or one particular inability. Like, I don't know if someone has social anxiety, like, oh, I'm such a failure. I can't talk in front of people or whatever. And so this is me. I'm not good enough, right? That is an exaggeration, because there's so many other good things we can do. Maybe in certain circumstances we can't talk in front of other people, but that's just one aspect, and we totally exaggerated it. And our mind, because it feels so low about ourselves, sometimes may just need this kind of feeling up about it, and we may go to the other extreme of like, yeah, but I'm really good at math or something, right? I'm really good at programming computers, whatever it is. Oh, but that I'm better. Yeah, this person is good at socializing, but I'm better with a computer. And so there's this arrogance. If they tell me something about programming or computer, no, I can't bear it. That makes total sense. We're great. We're really good at going from one extreme to the other. Does that answer that?
Yeah.
That's
I
why the
was
middle
trying to
way is so
find that
difficult. Yeah, go
I
ahead.
was trying to find that counterbalance, like how you were talking about arrogance,
Yeah.
but all the other aspects that you talked about, like other people having better qualities and so forth, it didn't counterbalance to like make my arrogance go down. And there must be something else that is working that I kind of thought, and I couldn't figure it out. So I'm just asking
Ah,
you. Yeah.
okay. Just other people also have, but like this arrogance, because it comes from, oh, because whatever you're good at, if there's arrogance, it comes because other people helped you to reach that. That doesn't help, right? Is that what you're saying? It doesn't help. No, no, no. Okay. Okay, that all right. No, if that doesn't help, then forget it. Well, that there's someone who's better than you, would that help? Also, I mean, you just need to see what helps for you in every situation. How, and this is the beauty of it, how we take these ideas, especially when it comes to dependent origination, and we ourselves, because you know your arrogance better than I know yours. I know my own arrogance, and certainly you have your individual arrogance, and I have mine. We both call it arrogance, but it's different. So there are times when certain things work for me, and other times something else works. And so I've found ways in which I could deal, but I like that you said I find a way to deal with it. That's a good way to start with it, because in the end, the solution lies with those ideas. Yeah, but it's good to experiment with that. All right, thank you for the question. Okay, let me check whether there are any more.
Geshe, there are two questions now in the chat.
Yeah, that's great.
One
Okay,
is, could you give an example of what is permanent?
something that is permanent. Okay.
Mhm.
All right. Well, permanent is a concept. It actually means static. So permanent doesn't mean uh, that something is always there. That's not the meaning of permanent. Permanent means that it doesn't change moment by moment. So the meaning of permanent is that something doesn't change moment by moment. It's not um, a phenomenon that from moment to moment is different. So let me give you an example. Um, the the absence of I always use the same example, the absence of an elephant on my table. My table, of course, is impermanent. It's made of atoms, it's made of molecules that are constantly changing. An elephant, in the same way, is made of atoms, it's constantly changing. But the mere absence of, right now, the elephant on my table, of course, I can take an elephant, or to take another example here, I've got a mobile phone, right? So the absence of mobile phone on my table, right? That exists right now. The mobile phone is impermanent, but the absence is static. It's just an absence. It's not like the first moment of the absence slightly changes to the second moment of the absence. Is it eternal? No. now there's no longer an absence. I actually put it on the table right now. So there's no longer an absence of mobile phone on my table. Now, right now, it's non-existent. Now it comes into existence again. But that doesn't mean it's eternal or non-eternal. Permanent has nothing to do with eternal. No, it's not eternal because a moment ago it wasn't there and now it's there. What I'm saying is that it's not static. So, sorry, that it's static. The absence of my mobile phone is not static. It changes moment by moment. But the absence of mobile phone on my table, that is static. That is permanent. Does that make sense? Whoever asked the question, it's a difficult one. Trying to
It's a-
understand. Pardon?
Yes, and in
Oh.
relation to that, what about consciousness? Is that
Consciousness is impermanent.
is
Consciousness
impermanent,
changes
changes
all the time.
constantly? So
Yes.
then permanence means something that is static. So it's really
Yeah,
so
exactly.
I'm just trying to
Yeah.
get my head in thinking of it in the right way.
Yes, yes. Okay.
Okay, so more
Yes.
it describes static. is a
Yes,
good
it
way to think.
describes permanent here in the Buddhist context means static. It means that even if it's eternal, it doesn't change moment by moment.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank
So
you.
oftentimes abstracts are permanent. Yeah, like absence of table.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
You're welcome. All right, there was another question, right? Let me find it. At some point you said it's good to, yeah. At some point, so Seda has a question. At some point you said it's good to get everyone involved and bring them on the path of out of warm-heartedness, or we should work on ourselves first to be able to others again out of warm-heartedness. It's good to get everyone involved. So we should try to get everyone involved and bring them on the path out of warm-heartedness, or we should work on ourselves first to be able to do both. I think there's no contradiction. We should, of course, work on ourselves. So the question basically, should we work towards the benefit of others right away? No, Buddhist practice is pretty much definitely the focus is on ourselves first, but not to the exclusion of others. So to still take any kind of opportunity in our, for instance, our motivation when we start the day, to just say one day, tomorrow morning, you want to practice the Dharma. I'm putting it in this way because Dharma practice doesn't mean you have to be in retreat. It doesn't mean you have to be up in the mountains. Wherever we are, we can practice the Dharma. So to practice effectively, let's say tomorrow, I start the day with a motivation. May whatever I do in the long term be of benefit to all sentient beings. May, and this is just the power of the mind. So because of the power of the mind, our motivation is extremely important because it can actually, in the long term, have a very beneficial effect on all sentient beings. So I already set my mind in that direction. So I'm focusing on all sentient beings. But then how am I going to practice? Am I going to go out and all day long and try to help others? There's no need for that. Of course, if I can do things to help others, um, of course, any opportunity, great. But I don't have to go out now and work in a hospital by all means to be able to practice the Dharma. No, I mean, the first step is to watch my own mind. What are my harmful afflictions? Mindfulness, that's the basis of everything. Introspection, what am I thinking? What am I doing? Am I harming others? Am I having thoughts of hatred and hostilities and so forth, by which I actually harm myself, of course, indirectly others, but directly myself. And because of this, I cannot be most effective towards others. So in a way, the focus is on my own thoughts, on thought transformation, etc., but with the long-term goal to be of greatest benefit. So the long-term goal is always in the back of my mind. That's why I'm doing this. But in the meantime, I need to focus on myself. That's a bit like if you want to become a doctor and cure everyone of a particular disease that you also suffer from. Well, first you need to get well enough to have the space, to have the energy to work for others. But this is not a process of either you work for yourself or for others. No, as time progresses, you become better and better at giving your energy for others. It's like a slow transformation from just me versus, oh, a little bit more also the others. So it's a slow transformation where a practitioner starts to, at some point, the self becomes, you still work with yourself, but the self is less important than everyone else's, than everyone else. And so really love and compassion are the driving force of your practice. Okay, I hope I made that clear. Seda, if you have a further question, if it's not clear yet, please either raise your hand or just add something to the chat.
I think Igor has a question in the chat, but Igor, you want to ask it yourself? Is your internet good enough? Are you
Was that
shy?
Igor?
No, I'm not
Here we
shy.
go.
Thank you very much.
Oh,
Thank you
hi,
very much.
Igor.
Kumpel
Hi,
Lai.
oh, it's been a long time.
Hi, Igor.
It's been a long time. Thank you very much
Sure.
for the time and for an amazing teaching. I would like to ask a question with regard to keeping the. Is it the microphone?
No, this is
Uh,
mine. This is my. I have a problem with my. Somehow it's not working. But go ahead. If you speak up a little, then I can hear you.
Yes. It is an idea of while visualizing or imagining
Yeah.
during a meditation to
Yes.
keep the lack of inherent existence. So
Yeah.
could you give a little bit advice about this? How to make sure it is this imagination not become solidified, in somehow,
Oh.
how to keep the mind of some advice on how to keep the mind of lack of inherent existence while visualizing or imagining different things.
Oh, so you're saying like, for instance, visualizing empty space when you
No,
think, no.
no, specifically visualizing like a guru or visualizing merit field and visualizing different things that we visualize, keeping
Ah,
the lack of inherent existence
oh, so at the same time,
at the
while
same
being
time.
aware, yeah, okay, now I understand. So, for instance, to meditate on the merit field, to meditate on the Buddha, while at the same time keeping this awareness that the Buddha lacks inherent existence. Okay, now this is really difficult. It's difficult enough, of course, to be aware of the lack of inherent existence of things. So this, of course, we need to train ourselves in. And then the next step is then when you look at things such as the Buddha, the image of the Buddha or some Buddha figure, to then switch. You actually simultaneous we can't do because that would mean we can perceive the two truths simultaneously, right? You cannot perceive the ultimate nature of the Buddha and the Buddha as a conventional truth at the same time. Just one mind can't do that. In Tantra, it's slightly different. Okay, so it's like in Tantra, but this is debated. It's really debated. Are you doing it with one mind, or is the mind switching back and forth so quickly that you're basically perceiving, you're remembering their inherent existence every now and then, and you go back to the Buddha, switching back and forth. But actually, the way it is usually described is that the image of the Buddha has arisen from within emptiness. So even though emptiness is not part of your mind, it's not the object of the mind, but the mind, somewhere in some part of the mind, it's always aware that it has arisen from emptiness. So it just doesn't allow for the idea of it truly and inherently being there. It doesn't allow for it to arise in the mind, but that's the ideal version of it. For us, we're so used to inherent existence. I guess we need to go back again and again and remind ourselves. I think at some point, from a tantric point of view, you can do that. You can actually always be aware it has arisen from emptiness, it lacks inherent existence, and see it as a mere appearance to the mind. So this is for someone on a certain advanced level. For us, it's like going back again and again, lacks inherent existence, and then, right? And doing this alternating, I think is probably not a bad idea. Yeah. And always having a sense it's like an illusion. To also, if you can have a sense it's like an illusion, it appears that way, but it doesn't exist that way, then I guess you're more on the side accepting also the lack of inherent existence, despite the fact that it is an enlightened being. That's a very advanced kind of a question, but yeah, but still an important one, especially when it comes to certain practices. Yeah. All right.
So much.
You're
So
welcome.
very kind.
Sure, of course. All right. There's a new question I can see. No, there isn't. Oh, wait.
No, I think Geshe-la, that was Igor's question, the new one.
Okay. I see.
And a big thank you from Sarah.
Okay, yes, all right. Great. Are there any further questions? Any of you have another question? No. All right. Okay, that's it. 2 hours. Wow. Those went quickly. Okay, great. So thank you very much. It's dark where you are now. Venerable Kumbila. All right, so thank you very much. That's the end of it. So let's use the power of the mind one last time to dedicate whatever positive potential we've accumulated together here, going through the different aspects of dependent origination. So may this, of course, help us to get to know our mind better, to reduce our afflictions and replace them with positive states of mind, so that in the long term, we develop our mind to such a degree that we are of greatest benefit, not just to ourselves, but to all sentient beings. Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you,
And
Geshe-la.
have a great day.
Thank you
You're
so much,
Thank you.
Geshe-la, for these
Thank you,
amazing
Geshe-la.
teachings.
Thank you,
Very
Tushita.
clear teachings. And thank you so much. And whoever wants to have more of Geshe-la's amazing teachings, please consider joining her advanced course at Tushita every year in June. And also Geshe-la will teach in the institution she has studied in from, I think, end of April, right, Geshe-la?
Yes, that's the plan.
Yes.
End of
So
April.
if you wanted to know more about that, just contact us and we let you know. Thank you so much, Geshe-la.
Thank you.
Have a wonderful afternoon in Germany. And
Thank you.
everybody who's joining us here in India, have a good evening. It's dark already. And in the Americas, I think they're just getting up. Yes, thank you so much. And see you tomorrow. Tomorrow we have another amazing day of miracle with Venerable Sangye Kadro joining us from Singapore, actually, where she used to be the resident teacher for 11 years. And she is talking about a zillion reasons to love sentient beings. Wonderful. Thank you so much. And at 5 o'clock Indian time again. Thank you so much, Geshe-la.
Thank
See you
you.
very soon.
Bye-bye.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Tushita.
Bye-bye.
Thank you, Kumpel. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Igor.